All right. Good morning, Facebook, YouTube people. TV Land, as a friend of mine used to say when they started doing their YouTube stuff way back in the day. Give people a minute to jump on here and also look at my settings on Facebook. Make sure I adjust it so that it's public. So if you want to share it, you can. And also make sure I'm on. Yes, I am. Sorry. Hope everybody's doing well. It's the Sunday before Christmas. Today I'm going to talk about something Christmassy, the virgin birth. Titling this the Virgin Birth Reinterpreted. So there's your trigger warning if you're not into this kind of content. Just trying to make sure I get it up on the New Day Global group, coming in on YouTube and Facebook, since those are the two places that I primarily stream from on Sunday mornings. Well, not primarily. These are the only two places that I stream from. And yeah, everything looks good. So again, Merry Christmas, everybody. It is, what is today? Today's date, Sunday, December 22nd, 2024. Hard to believe. Time just keeps flying by. Hi, Marietta. Good to see you on today. Hope you're doing well. And yeah, let's jump in. So I want to summarize what I've been talking about the last few weeks and kind of put it under this heading of Christmas, the Christmas story of Jesus. I'm well aware that people can celebrate Christmas without including Jesus, or even by including Jesus, but without any kind of faith in the story at all, or certainly any kind of deep faith. But like I said last week, the Christmas story of Jesus has been meaningful to me since I was a child. And of course, it's taken on different meanings. And I also want to summarize stuff I've been talking about. So a few weeks ago, I talked about life from a shamanic perspective, this idea that shamans have held regardless of where they were located, regardless of the time frame and the time period, this idea that we are dreaming our reality, and connecting that with modern neuroscience, and particularly this. Hey, Bishop, good to see you on here. Bishop Jamel, great to see you, man. He's been putting out some great stuff. If you don't follow him on Facebook, Jamel Broadnax, Bishop Jamel Broadnax, I would recommend that you do that. Unconditional Love Consciousness Center in, let's see if I get it right. Is it Greensboro, North Carolina? I think I got that right. If not, please forgive me for getting the town wrong. Anyway, great stuff. It's been doing a great work. One of the, I think, real leaders on the edge of, let's call it Aquarian spirituality and the shift from the age of Pisces and religion and spirituality under a Piscean frame into a Aquarian frame. That's how I would interpret it. Hope I didn't butcher it for you, Bishop. But anyway, check out his stuff. It's really good. So I've been talking about this idea that we dream our reality, and then connecting that with the latest, findings in neuroscience, the work of Dr. Donald Hoffman, and other neuroscientists, and just generally what I know, what I remember from college and from studies that I've done. Yeah, Greensboro, North Carolina, he says, cool. And it's this idea that we are living in our own perception of reality, and we respond not to reality as it is, but we respond to reality based on our perception of it. And our perception is framed by our beliefs, by our biases, et cetera, and so on. It's impossible to not have a bias. It's impossible to not have presuppositions because of the nature of our perceptions. That we're not, I mean, neuroscience tells us this for sure. I don't even think this is controversial in any way, shape, or form. We don't relate to reality out there directly as it is. We have information that comes in to our brains from our 5 physical senses, and then our senses generate what's called a gestalt of reality, and then presents that to us so that we are sensing everything actually from the inside, or we're living off of the model that our brain gives us, or the map that our brain gives us of reality as it exists outside of us. So again, we're not dealing with reality directly. We don't see things. Let's just take vision, for example. We don't see things as they actually are. We know that there are colors in the spectrum that we can't see. We know that there are frequencies, for example, that our dogs can hear that we cannot hear. And so what happens is that our brain generates this stuff for us. So the reality is everything that you see, when you open your eyes and you look around, everything that you see, you're not seeing it necessarily. You're seeing the image that is being given to you from within, or that's being generated by your brain. And the hard truth about it, if it is a hard truth, is that our perceptions are modulated, influenced, and in many ways governed by our beliefs and by our belief system. So we will only experience what we actually, truly, at a core level, at a deep level, at a subconscious level, believe. We will only experience what we believe, and we will shape our view of reality based on our, again, presuppositions, what we suppose to be true before we have an experience. So from this standpoint, then, we are dreaming our reality. It is all a dream. I'm going to say this again. The images that you see are not coming from without. They are coming from within, even when you're looking out. So when people say, someone has a spiritual experience, let's say, and someone says, well, that's just your imagination. Well, the truth is that the external model of reality that you're seeing is also your imagination. All imagery, all pictures, all imagining comes from within. So from a shamanic perspective, the shamans would tell us that we are constantly dreaming our reality. We are constantly editing information, deleting information, distorting information, generalizing information in order to make sense of the world around us. Our brain is constantly filtering out stuff. There's been a tremendous group that's done a lot of research on this. I don't agree with some of their stuff for sure, because they conclude that intuition is unreliable, and I think intuition is very reliable. But without getting into the nuances of it, they've written a book. There's some videos out on YouTube called The Invisible Gorilla, that points this out, that even with our external world, when there is something present that we do not expect to see, our brain will adjust for that by deleting that which is present. So they have a video out there called The Invisible Gorilla that you can go out and watch. And I'm going to spoiler alert for you. It's kind of a spoiler alert because you know the name of it. But what they do is they have, 5 or 6 kids on a basketball court passing the ball back and forth to each other. And you're told to try to count the number of times that the ball gets passed. So you're focused on the kids and them passing the ball, and you count the number of times. And then they'll ask you how many times was the basketball passed? And people will generally, I've done this in groups, I've done this in small groups, I've done this in large groups with the video from YouTube. And people will come up with, usually the same number, maybe one or two off if they missed a count or added an extra one in there. But usually they're within one count of how many times the ball was passed. And then the next question is, how many of you saw the gorilla, the man in the gorilla suit on the basketball court? And in every group I've ever done this with, anybody I've ever shown this with, nobody sees a gorilla or a man in a gorilla suit on the basketball court. And yet, if you rewind the YouTube video, so there's no camera tricks involved, while they're passing the ball in plain view, not hidden, not off in a corner, center camera is a person in a gorilla suit doing all kinds of funny stuff, trying to distract the players, etc., and so on. But nobody sees it until you're told that it's there. And then when you watch it from then on, you always see the gorilla because you know the gorilla is there. Tanya West says this, cool. Tanya, thank you for validating this. She says, we watched that in Police Academy to show we never really see that which we are fully focused on. So my point is that thing gets completely deleted. There's other perceptual tools and tricks that they use. I remember the first time that I was taught this in a class, they didn't use the invisible gorilla. The invisible gorilla really stands out because there's literally something there that your brain does not. Your brain completely edits it out, makes it completely invisible, even though it's there the entire time. But the way I was exposed to this was someone had written a sentence on a white board with black ink, and it was snake in the grass. And they asked us to read the sentence, and we read the sentence over and over again. Snake in the grass. It's a snake in the grass. But it's like, why do you keep asking us? Well, there were two thes. The word the was in there twice. But the way they wrote it, they put a snake in the, and then the next line they put the grass. And quite literally, this the, for me, that was at the end of the first line, was not there. It literally was not there. And then when they told me there were two, a double reference of the word the there, it materialized. I mean, it was the weirdest thing. I'm looking at a white board. There's no writing. And when they tell me it's there, I literally see it appear or manifest out of nowhere. So the truth is that we do not see what is out there. We don't see everything that's out there. We are dreaming our reality. And therefore, we only perceive what we believe. We only perceive what our brain allows us to perceive based on our presuppositions, our confirmation biases, our predispositions, and what we believe. Now, if we do that with something as obvious as a word that's written there, and I can watch it materialize because my brain deleted it so that I didn't see it. I saw whiteboard, it's completely invisible. Then someone tells me that it's there, and because it is there, my brain allows it to come into perception. Now, if the word the wasn't written there to begin with, my brain would still not be able to see it because it's not there. My point is not that we generate and create, although we can do that, but as a general rule, we do more deleting than anything else. We shut out more information because we don't have the neurological capacity in these bodies to process that much information at one time. So in order to make sense of all the information that's coming in, the vast majority of it has to be deleted. Same thing, if there wasn't a gorilla in the basketball court in the video, we wouldn't see the gorilla, even though we were told to see the gorilla. At least most people won't. Some people's minds probably would generate that. That's how hypnosis works. But most people are just blocking out what's there. Now, I want you to take this and think about this when we're evaluating abstract or unseen or invisible concepts. When we're talking about things like God, or we're talking about angels, or we're talking about demons, or we're talking about other dimensions of reality that may have actually inhabitants within them that are non-physical, that aren't part of this physical world, and yet some people will see them and other people won't. Some people will be able to sense and communicate with loved ones who have passed over, who have left this life and entered into those non-physical realms and dimensions. And other people will have no ability to contact them whatsoever. But by the same token, people didn't see the invisible gorilla. I didn't see the extra "the" that was written in the sentence. So if you have a strong confirmation bias, if you have a strong predisposition against non-material reality, if you are sold into this social agreement, this social consensus, because that's all it is a social consensus and a social agreement that materialism is all there is. That is the philosophical basis for science and the scientific method. It's called scientific materialism. And if you were to look at the history of this and look at the history of enlightenment, you would discover that there was a push for materialism in order to undermine the religious authorities and the power of the Catholic Church in Europe at the time, and to push back against faith and to push back against religion. So even the people who were solidly forming and distributing and creating the social consensus that became the foundational philosophy and presupposition of science openly admit in their writings, some of them, that materialism, scientific materialism, is probably the most unlikely scenario for the foundation of reality, but is a necessary agenda in order to change the culture or in order to subvert the power of religion and the power of the church. In other words, what they're saying is, I don't believe in scientific materialism, but I'm going to publish and push and publicly talk about scientific materialism, that this material world is all that there is. This material world is all that exists, because that is going to undermine the political authority and the political power. So what I'm saying is that scientific materialism, has presuppositions built into it. And the presuppositions, the philosophical presupposition and confirmation bias for all of science, the foundation of all of it is materialism. And the people who propagated that, some of them, not all of them, but a lot of the voices that propagated that during the Enlightenment period said this is the most unlikely scenario to be true, to give us a true map or a true representation of reality, but it's necessary. So they're admitting that they're doing it not based on scientific reasons, but based on political reasons, based on not for reasons of discovering what is the ontology, what is the actual nature of reality, but for reasons that we're pushing because of political agendas that are being set forward. And then a lot of those that, again, are responsible for what we have today, historically responsible for what we have today as a scientific method, were hermeticists. And they also were trying to undermine the power of the church, but they were envisioning an entirely different system of theology, philosophy of life, concept of reality that was more akin to Platonism and Neoplatonism rather than Abrahamic religions and Judeo-Christianity, etc. So here's my point. If the vast majority of people can block out something that actually physically exists in their line of sight because their brain does not expect to see it and they don't believe that it's there, so therefore in their perception, in their observation, which is also the foundation of science, they completely block that out, then how much more when we are committed to saying that physical reality is all there is, how much more then are we going to not be able to perceive what comes to us from those other realms and those other dimensions? I was talking to not really a friend, more like an acquaintance recently. And this guy has a real interest in the paranormal. And you know, he's connected with all these organizations that do like the paranormal experiments with like haunted houses and haunted places. And he was telling me that he's been to every haunted place in the state of Colorado that he knows about. All the big ones, all the really popular ones. He's been there several times, and he's tried to see ghosts, or he's tried to experience these hauntings. And never, not one time, has he ever seen anything that could not be explained by materialism. And it dawned on me that even with haunted places, it's more about the person having the experience than it is the actual place. I'm going to say that again. Even with hauntings of places, if we're talking about hauntings, even hauntings of places, locations, some people will experience phenomena, other people won't experience phenomena, because it has to do with the belief system of the person, because your brain will only allow you to experience what you believe. So how much easier then is it then when we're talking about God, when we're talking about non-physical reality, when we're talking about spirits, we're talking about entities or things that are beyond the normal parameters of perception? Are we likely to edit it out, discount it, have a confirmation bias, etc.? Of course we are. And the more confident that we are that this world is all there is, this life is all there is, there's nothing after this life, there's no dimensions that are unseen, there's certainly no entities that are populating dimensions. And so one of the things that's happened in psychology in the last 100 to 150 years, you'll notice that a lot of what's being talked about now in medical circles and clinical circles and counseling circles, we're calling it behavioral health rather than calling it mental health. You'll notice that. Community centers now, community counseling centers are being called such and such behavioral health. If your doctor talks to you, they may say, we're going to give you a referral to behavioral health. So behavioral health has become the term that professionals use to define the profession, because we are so committed to a scientific worldview, we're so committed to a materialist worldview, that the only thing that can actually be studied, observed, verified, and repeated is what's observable, what's present to the observer. And since we can't see your mental functions, we depend on your self-reporting. All we can actually observe, or all that can actually come into our senses from someone else about their mind or their mental health, is their behaviors. Their behaviors are what we can observe. Their what they say they experience internally is what we can put down on paper. It's what we can observe or hear. It's what we can take in. So therefore now we're calling it behavioral health. Most therapies, if you're going to counseling and you were to ask your counselor, what type of therapy are you going to give me while I'm paying you to be my counselor? And most of them that insurances accept are going to have behavior in the title. In fact, insurances will only accept types of interventions and types of therapies. They will only pay for types of therapies that are behavioral in nature. I hadn't planned on going into all this, but I'm going to keep going. That are behavioral in nature. So they may say, well, we're doing CBT, anything with a B in it. We're doing CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or we're doing DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, etc., and so on. So what happened in the last 150 years is that all of psychology moved away from really the study of the content of the mind, the content, what's actually going on with you inside of you. What are the qualities of your consciousness experience? What are the qualities of your mental experience? And look at what behaviors are you engaging in. So there was I know it seems like I'm going off on a tangent, but I'm going to come back to what I was talking about. in a minute with perception and dreaming your reality. So the original, so like Sigmund Freud is generally considered to be like the father of modern psychology. We know Carl Jung was one of his proteges. That's the word I'm looking for. And they were really concerned with content. That's why they talk about things like the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, et cetera, and so on. They were interested in the content and the structure of what's actually going on inside of the person, or in the person's mind, in the person's consciousness, in the person's awareness. But at the same time, you had people like B.F. Skinner. If you had a basic psychology class, you might remember some of these names. Skinner's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, who were already operating in the scientific materialist bias and confirmation, and pushing the area of psychology into behaviorism, so that everything is based on, so that most therapies now are based on a reward, sometimes even reward and punishment type of reinforcement for the behaviors that you want. If you get someone, especially someone that has a doctorate degree, some kind of a doctorate degree, a PsyD, a doctorate in psychology, or a PhD, a doctorate of philosophy in psychology, almost everything that they are going to tell you, is the research says, is going to be based on behaviorism. But that's because for at least the last 100 years, the bias for the funding for the research has been geared towards behaviorism. Like I already said, insurance companies will only pay for behavioral type therapies. So we quite literally, why am I talking about this? Because I want you to understand that based on the social agreements that we have today and the way that society is going today, we have eliminated the soul. We have eliminated the soul. By that, I mean, we've said there is no soul, there is no self. We have, even because science cannot address the hard problem of consciousness and come to a solution, then the answer is to pretend like it doesn't exist and give it all kinds of scholastic authority. And so the mind, the consciousness, the soul is being erased in our perceptions. Because remember, if I don't know the gorilla's there, I don't see the gorilla. So if I say there is no soul, if I say there is no spirit, if I say there is nothing to consciousness besides what we can observe, because I'm committed to making psychology a science, so therefore it has to be observed, then I've done away with the soul. We have imported Eastern philosophies and Eastern ideas, associated them with spirituality, imported just enough of Zen, Buddhism, just enough of Buddhism, just enough of Hinduism, just enough of Taoism, that we don't import the full philosophical system that these systems are built on, or we act like they're monoliths. We act like they're homogenous. Well, Buddhists believe this. No, Buddhists believe all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of different Buddhists. There's even a Buddhist hell. But what we have imported, what has made it past the screen of our consciousness and been emphasized in the West from the East, is this concept of no self, this concept that there is no self inside of you, that all of the parts of yourself that you experience are an illusion, that it's all just ego, and that the best way to alleviate suffering is to realize, is to let go of attachments. And when you let go of attachments, there's no self there. They can't find a self. And here's the thing. When we are diagnosing people with personality disorders, two of the most destructive personality disorders in terms of relationships are what's called a narcissistic personality disorder. And there's a lot of TikTok videos and a lot of YouTube videos about narcissism and NPD, but they're not clinical. They're just based on people's anecdotal experiences. So there's narcissistic personality disorder and there's borderline personality disorder. And at the root of both of these personality disorders, there is no solid sense of self. There is no self. And we're able to recognize when you have no sense of self, this isn't new stuff. This isn't open for, oh my God, the Buddha taught this, or oh my God, look at this, and then act like you have a basis of authority to push this on other people. And the reason I push so hard back against this and alienate people on this channel because of it is because I, coming from the more scientific, I'm not saying science is bad, by the way, I'm just saying that it's very limited. So I don't want to confuse you by saying, wait, I thought you just told us that science was bad. No, I didn't say science was bad. I said that science was limited. Science is very good at letting us know certain things. It just cannot tell us about the nature of reality. In fact, if you want to know the truth, science tells us how things behave. It doesn't tell us what they are. And that's not just true in psychology. That's true in biology, et cetera, and so on. I mean, yeah, there's a certain degree that tells us what it is, but we know what it is based on what it does, not based on actually penetrating the nature of what it is. We can't really come to a consensus about what is life, in other words. So my point is, we import all this stuff from the East and then tell people you have no self and you need to divest yourself of self. But yet the evidence of what is observable, the behaviors of people who say who experience no self, who really have no solid ego, who have dissolved their ego or never had the opportunity to have a solid sense of self formed in them because of the traumas that they experienced in their life, create disaster in their relationships. They are unhappy, they are depressed, they are anxious, and when they relate to people, particularly in intimate relationships, they create anxious, depressed people. So I'm not slamming Buddhism, I'm not slamming Hinduism or Taoism or Eastern philosophies. What I'm saying is that we selectively import from these philosophies and from these systems that which fits with a paradigm, a social agreement within the Western world and within America that says there is no psyche, there is no soul, there is no consciousness, and materialism is all there is. And if materialism is all there is, then there is no spirituality. Now, why am I talking about this? Because what we tend to do is completely deny the existence of other dimensions of reality and completely deny the existence of non-physical entities as being anything separate from ourselves. So when people say, this is an archetype, this is part of the collective unconscious, they're using Jungian language to dismiss to subtly, very, very subtly diminish the reality of unseen invisible dimensions and the independent existence of unseen non-physical entities that we may encounter by simply claiming that they're part of what we already understand. It's just part of the collective unconscious. And because Jung is hard to understand, even for Jungian analysts, even for people who have made their life's study out of the work of Jung, will say that Jung's hard to understand. We can throw out Jungian archetype. That's just an archetype. That's just part of the collective unconscious and whatever. And that's as far as it's going to go, because nobody's going to check Jung's original sources for sure. Nobody's going to do that. Very, very few people are going to look at original sources. And it just helps us reinforce the materialist worldview that this material world is all there is. And if we can edit and delete things from our physical perceptions that are actually physically there, like in the case of the invisible gorilla, then how much easier is it for us to completely eliminate these arenas that require other sensory perceptions or extrasensory perceptions in order to experience them? All right. What does any of this have to do with the virgin birth? You're probably asking yourself, what does any of this have to do with the story of Jesus? The first thing that I wanted to make clear, but I wanted to thoroughly explain, is when I say we are dreaming our reality, or when people from a shamanic perspective say we are dreaming our reality, they don't mean that there is nothing out there. They just mean that we live and exist inside our own version of reality, our own deleted and distorted dream of what's happening instead of what's actually happening. And those dreams are based on some kind of agreements that we make with the society around us. So we come in, let's just assume for a minute that the soul exists. To me, this is self-evident because everything that we experience is in consciousness. I want you to think about this. Psychology is trying to do away completely with consciousness and saying only that which can be observed, which is behavior, is valid. Yet we know that there's problems on the part of the observer. I've been spending over a half hour explaining that. So if the foundation of science, and this can be trusted because it's observable, but we know science, we know very basically, very surely, that there are problems with the observer, there are flaws in the observer, there are presuppositions in the observer, there are confirmation biases in the observer. You say, yeah. But we get around confirmation biases with the scientific method because it has to be peer reviewed and it has to be a double-blind study, et cetera, and so on. Okay. There's a lot more to it than that also, but I don't want to take everybody's time going into that. But if that's your position and you'd like to discuss it, I'd be open and happy to discuss that. For one thing, I will just say this for people that are watching and may be curious: funding determines research. And you have to present, this is what we're going to research before you can get funding. And don't think for 1 second that there are not agendas that are tied to finances. There are lots of scientists, lots of people in the academies that have these experiences of non-physical reality, but refuse to talk about them because it will jeopardize their profession, i.e. jeopardize their bottom line. So there is a financial agenda to what gets studied, why it gets studied, and the narratives that are being put out there. All right. So there's that problem. There's also problems with the scientific method, but let's just move on from that. So this is based on certain agreements that we have, so that we come in and we begin to dream the corporate dream based on those agreements that we make with those that are part of our social, emotional world. So I'll have emotional agreements, social agreements, and these things will affect the dream, so that I start dreaming the dream of the culture, or dreaming with them the dream of the culture. And then I have to create a self that I can dream, a self that I can dream that plays the proper role or the proper character within the culture. You see what I'm saying? I dream up a self. So when I was in Christianity, I had a dream of Christianity that I was dreaming, and I had a self that I dreamed up to fit into that dream of Christianity. When I was deconstructing, I'm dreaming a self. We're constantly dreaming. And the goal, not the goal, because goal makes it sound like there's a terminus or an endpoint. The foundation, the beginning work of any solid spiritual practice, of any spiritual health, if you will, requires that we recognize the agreements that we've made with the society around us, and where we're dreaming, where we're caught like a fly caught in a spider's web, where we're caught in the dream of the group around us, but it may not be consistent with our dream, or it may not be consistent with the purpose that our soul came in to accomplish. I'm getting comments here. I want to go ahead and look at them. I am going to get to the virgin birth, I promise. I don't like how they do the comments on this platform, but Tanya says, so good, Aaron. Reminds me of the book, The Holographic Universe. I've been hearing about that. I've never read that book. I might have to pick it up because it keeps hitting my radar. Joe says, from my 1970s education as a teacher, B.F. Skinner was God, and behaviorism is also shallow in my view. Yeah, it's true. Tanya says, the observer effect is required to create one's reality. Yes, very good point. Everything observed from one individual to another is always bound by personal experience or perception. Lisa Brown, hey, Lisa. She says, interesting about Carl Jung because he was an astrologer and got a it's exactly what I was talking about, Lisa, when I said people won't go to the original sources. Interesting about Carl Jung because he was an astrologer. Yeah, he used astrology charts to help treat his patients and got a lot of his archetypes from astrology, which deals with the unseen, otherworldly, as well as what can be observed. Yes, it makes me wonder if if it's the way some of his work has been interpreted. Yes, because his work has been interpreted with that need to push things into behavioralism. And we want to do away with this stuff. We want to do away with astrology. Most people don't know anything about astrology. Not really. They know about their horoscope and maybe their sun sign and maybe who they're supposed to be compatible with. And a lot of people look at that and say, well, I'm not like that at all. But Lisa's an astrologer. She did an astrology chart for me. And it was absolutely amazing. It was mind-blowing. Lots I could go into on that. Maybe I'll bring her on if she's willing to come on and we can talk about that. That would be awesome. So there you go, Lisa. There's your invitation if you want to come on and do an episode. I don't know if you're interested in that, so I don't mean to put you on the spot. I apologize for that. Marietta says, I would like to respond and suggest any person who calls themselves an expert witness needs to hear and understand aspects of this posting. Someone says, I'm not seeing the chats. Hey, sometimes I don't see them. So I can't help you with that. Oh, yeah. Some of them are from the Facebook stream and some of them are from the YouTube stream. So, all right. So what does this have? What in the world, Aaron, does any of this have to do with the virgin birth and Christmas? I don't know. I kind of got sidetracked into that other stuff. And I guess I'm passionate about this because I don't want to lose the soul. I don't want to lose the self. I don't want to lose tools like astrology. I was starting to say, mind-blowing, the information that can be gleaned from that. I've been looking at and studying the works of a guy named Franz Mesmer, who was a healer in, I want to say, the 1700s, and had published thousands. There were thousands of scientific studies at the time and papers that were published using Mesmer's techniques. If you've heard the term mesmerism, the word being mesmerized or mesmerism comes from the work of Franz Mesmer. And most people think he's the father of hypnosis. I would like to suggest that what Franz Mesmer employed as a healing method had nothing to do with hypnosis. This is for the geeks and the nerds in the crowd. But it was a healing modality, and it got rejected by the scientific academies at the time, even though he was seeing results that was way beyond where medicine was at that time. And it's sad to me. I just wonder what could have been if more research and investigation had been put into the things that he was doing instead of it just completely falling off the map. It's like we're 3 centuries behind where we could be if we were inclusive of multiple dimensions of reality, other entities that exist in these dimensions, the more mystical aspects of life, the reality of the soul, the reality of consciousness. And if we weren't so, as a society, stubbornly bent on this is the way things are. Now, I'm sure if you've watched this far, you probably think that I'm setting this up to talk about how the virgin birth really happened, really did occur, and we just don't believe it because we've never seen it in our experience. And that's not all where I'm going with this. So if you watch this far and that's what you were waiting for, I'm sorry to disappoint you. If you can use those arguments, some of the arguments that I've made to validate your belief in the virgin birth, good for you. I don't anymore believe the scriptures to be literal or feel the need to take them literally and historically. In fact, for me, where I'm at right now, the literal or historical interpretation of scripture is irrelevant. Whether it happened or didn't happen, the way it's recorded in the Gospels is completely irrelevant to me, because history other than telling me where I've come from and why I'm where I'm at, and maybe can give me pointers about where I'm going, is very not going to help me change my life. It's not going to, it doesn't have a practical impact upon my life. So whether historically, there's a lot of stuff in history that I don't know about. There's a lot of stuff in history that I do know about. Do I know if it really happened the way the historians tell me that it happened? No, I don't. Does it make a big difference in my life? No, it doesn't. So I don't think the historical versus mythological argument is really important or significant. But I am not saying that Jesus definitely was born of a virgin. What I am going to suggest is that, like any well-told story, the story of the birth of Christ can speak to us in our present reality in a way that makes a difference. And this is the essence of true myth. Joseph Campbell, who's an authority on myth, he's the authority on myth, defines a myth not as a fairy tale, not as a something that didn't happen, a story that didn't happen historically or whatever, but he defines it as a story told within the context of a culture that speaks to your spiritual potentials. And I'm passionate about spirituality. I hate that spirituality is being systematically removed and erased from our culture and from our society. It concerns me that we're losing the soul. It concerns me that we're losing the self. It concerns me that we're losing the spirit. It concerns me that we're losing all sense of God, because if we believe in God, God has to fit into the Abrahamic religion model, and we can't even conceive of a God that may be totally other or unlike the God that we're told about in the Bible. So therefore, we gravitate towards atheism, because we don't even have a language necessarily or any neural pathways in our brain to conceptualize something else. That concerns me. I think that's a problem. So that's why I spend so much time on that. But let's get to the story and what this has to do with us, and what the world, Aaron, does this have to do with dreaming? Because in my past episodes, what I've been saying is that we have an authentic self. We have a divine spark inside of us. We have a self that pre-existed birth in these bodies. Those are all my presuppositions. Those are all my confirmation biases. Not trying to convince anybody else that this is true. But if it's true, it does have real consequence and ramifications for us in this existence and in these daily lives. And even if you dismiss my presuppositions, even if you dismiss my beliefs in pre-existence, past lives, that you have a soul and that you have a self, you can still learn something from this that can benefit and be effective for you, specifically to liberate you and help you live the life that you've always wanted to live. Because for a lot of us, we have had to suppress our individual dream because it was so different and so weird and so odd, or it didn't fit within the social or collective dream. And so therefore, to dream our individual dream would cause us to risk social rejection, rejection from our families, rejection from our communities, rejection from our best friends. And so many of you that are part of this deconstruction community have told me stories where you have had to experience that and where you've had to go through that. And I applaud you for being willing to take the risk on yourself, because another confirmation bias, another presupposition that I have, is that the worst betrayal that anyone can commit and the worst betrayal that anyone can experience is self-betrayal, betraying yourself, betraying what you're passionate about, betraying what you genuinely believe in, violating your own soul, violating your own self for the sake of someone else's dream. And the truth is, when you wake up and realize, I've been living in this corporate dream, I have a dream of my own that I want to manifest, that I have a self that I want to express, that I want to be free to express. I don't want to repress or suppress these parts of me anymore. I want to do my shadow work. I want to discover my golden shadow, which I talked about in previous videos, the golden shadow, if you didn't see the previous video, is the positive parts of you, the potentials of you, the spiritual powers, the spiritual presence. The soul has become part of the golden shadow. The spiritual self has become, in other words, it's lost in the darkness. We don't know about it. We haven't discovered it, and we haven't done the work to integrate it into our lives. And most people that talk about shadow work are totally involved in the dark shadow work, trying to find the traumas and the dysfunctions and integrate them. And that's great. And that's important. And I talk a lot about that. And that's primarily the work that I do with people in therapy and in sessions, is helping them do the dark shadow work and integrate those parts of themselves. But nobody's talking about the golden shadow, the bright shadow, the spiritual, eternal, soulish parts of us where the gold is. That's why it's called the golden shadow, where the treasure is, where the power is, where the wisdom is. The undiscovered self that needs to be recovered and needs to be manifested. Some people call this the Christ self. Some people call this Christ consciousness. Carl Jung called it the golden shadow. Some people call it the bright shadow. But it's the part of us that has been buried under the dreams of this world, that has been buried under social pressure, that has been buried through our own repression of our dreams and our desires. It's amazing how many people will suppress positive emotions. It's amazing how much we'll suppress positive aspects of ourselves. It's amazing how much we will suppress our own dreams and our own desires. And the ego, if you want to talk about the ego, the trickster inside of us, the part of us that tricks us, will oftentimes relish in the dark shadow, love the dark shadow. Oh my God, I love to talk about my traumas. I love to talk about what happened to me. I love to talk about my pain. And for lots of times, because there's social gains with that. There can be social gains with that. There really can, but that's a topic for a different day. So my passion is to rediscover these things. And that's what Jesus represents. What if the entire time when we're reading about Jesus, we're supposed to be discovering a part of ourselves? Whether Jesus existed historically or not, what if the texts were written so that we could see, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 13, that Jesus Christ is in us? Or in other words, there are aspects of us that are the child of God, that are eternal, that are an eternal aspect of God. And these stories can help us discover them, help us uncover them, and help us begin to dream the dream of that in our life and insert that into this corporate environment, so that actually, just think how different the world would be if everyone had the freedom to be themselves. Obviously, within some social constraints, right? Social constraints, laws, whatever you want to call them, ethics that were set up to create boundaries. Boundaries is really the issue. We talk about ethics, but boundaries is really the issue. And if you say you have no self, if you buy into this concept that there is no self in there, then you have no self to have boundaries around. But what if we were all free to do this? And that's what I find so powerful about the story of the virgin birth. So let me just take this last bit of time here and reinterpret the story of Christmas from the perspective of Jesus Christ inside of you, the same way he was inside of Mary. So in that respect, all of us become the Virgin Mary in the story. I'm going to say that again. When we read it from this perspective, if we presuppose that there is a Christ consciousness, this golden shadow, I'm using religious language, but you don't have to use religious language. If you don't want religious language, you can call it the golden shadow. But this consciousness, this soul, this eternal being, this self that is inside of you, that is untouchable and immutable, unchangeable by the forces around you, but has been conceived, if you will, by the Holy Spirit. That there is an aspect and component of you that's absolutely sacred, absolutely eternal, absolutely conceived by God. So therefore you are a child of God. Well, that presupposes God. But a part of you that's an aspect of this, that's eternal to this, that Christ that is inside of you, right? A divine seed. I call it a divine spark because I borrow that from Hermeticism and ancient philosophies and teachings and occult traditions. But we could call it a divine seed, a divine seed, an eternal seed, an aspect of yourself that can be cultivated, an aspect of yourself that can be watered and nurtured and grown, and that will cause you to dream the dream of a different self, right? But you're by necessity going to have to break with the agreements of the society around you, the people around you, oftentimes, in order for you to be able to do that. So when you do begin to live your authenticity, your authentic self, you begin to dream your authentic life, you begin to nurture within the womb of your own mind and heart this nature, this soul, this divine seed, if you will. You begin to grow that inside of you. It is going to disrupt, more than likely, I won't say in every case, but very often it's going to disrupt everything else around you, all your relationships, your finances, even your health. Can become disrupted as this thing begins to be born and as this thing begins to manifest inside of you. So when people take action on their authenticity, oftentimes the illusion of the old world starts to pass away. The illusion of the old world starts to pass away. And by old world, what I mean is the old you, the old self, the context in which the old self operated. When you change the content, the context oftentimes goes through a shaking, so that, as the scripture says in Hebrews 12, everything that can be shaken is shaken around you. That's part of it. And so people will act on their true self, they'll act on their authenticity, and the old world will start to get shaken up. The old dream will start to fade. And then they'll want to cling to and hold on to the old dream and say, oh my God, I made a mistake. Oh, this is not the way to go. And you got all these voices around you that are going to tell you that as well. You're cursed by God. God's against you. Because things in the short term aren't working out for you. This is all part of the process. It's why Jesus and the Holy Family had to go down into Egypt, because Herod was trying to kill the baby that was born because it was a threat to his kingdom. So the number one quality that we have to have is the ability to trust ourselves and stick with ourselves and be authentic and true to ourselves and make a commitment and an agreement with ourselves that we will no longer betray ourselves in the future. That commitment, that solid, sold out commitment. Maybe we have to relocate. Maybe we have to go down into Egypt. Maybe we have to study a different system of thought and belief because it's more congruent and consistent with who we are than the one that we were born into. But the point is that there is a seed inside of you. There is something that is conceived of the Holy Spirit, something eternal inside of you that must be nurtured, that must be incubated. One of the most fascinating things to me about the Christmas story as it's told in Luke's gospel, because Luke's gospel and Matthew have totally different renderings or accounts of the birth of Jesus. The reason Matthew tells the story the way he does is because Matthew's Jesus is being told from the perspective to persuade people that he is the new Moses, whereas Luke does not have that agenda. So you'll find the parallels between the story of Jesus and the story of Moses, because the author's trying to prove that Jesus is the new Moses. All right, set that aside. In Luke's account, you have the account first of Elizabeth and Zechariah. And Zechariah is chosen to go into the Holy of Holies. So he goes into the temple, he goes into the Holy of Holies, he sees the angel Gabriel, the archangel Gabriel, who declares to him that his wife Elizabeth, watch this, who's barren, who's past the time of childbearing, is going to conceive and give birth. This is so interesting because she's not a virgin. His wife Elizabeth, she's not a virgin, but she's also not fertile myrtle. You know what I'm saying? Because she's already gone through menopause. There are no ovaries there. This is important. There's no eggs. I said there's no ovaries. You know what I'm saying. She's past the time of menopause. I misspoke there, but you know what I'm saying. So she cannot bring the feminine aspect of reproduction. And Gabriel says she's going to have a miraculous birth. In other words, God had to supply the feminine aspect in Elizabeth in order for John the Baptist to be born. I want to read Lisa's comment here. She said, I personally think religion and Christianity causes and creates mental illness in so many people. Yes, it does. Because they portray themselves over and over again. Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's the root of it. Always looking for an external rescuer and fixer, and then are disappointed when it doesn't work out. But the church keeps telling you to have faith and keep believing, and it's a continual betrayal of self. Oh my God, such powerful words. Internal resentment is created, yes. And a lot of times people don't acknowledge it as embedded in their subconscious programming. Such a great comment. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. Back to this, I want you to see that in order for John the Baptist to be born, God had to provide, in the story, right? God had to provide the feminine aspect of reproduction and recreation. Then you have Mary, who is a virgin. So you have someone who is old and someone who is young, both of them having a miraculous birth. In the older woman, Elizabeth, the miraculous birth happens because she's no longer producing eggs. So there's a miraculous egg inserted, if you will. In the story of Mary, she does have an active fertility system. I apologize, ladies. I'm a guy and I'm really a guy. So forgive me if I'm not speaking in the best ways about this stuff. I don't mean to be offensive. In the case of Mary, the egg is present, the sperm is not present. So the masculine component has to be added. So she says, how will this happen, seeing I know not a man? Zechariah says, how's this going to happen? Because my wife is past the age of childbearing. And he gets rebuked by the angel. Mary says, how will this happen? And the angel says, the power of the highest will come over you. The Holy Spirit, that which is conceived within you will be by the Holy Spirit. Right? Interesting, huh? And then he tells her, your cousin Elizabeth, who's past childbearing age, has conceived and is in her, I think, second trimester, I think in her 6th month, if I remember the text correctly. So here's the witness that you have. Now, why was Zechariah punished and Mary was informed? I think because there were testimonies and witnesses in the stories of the Old Testament that Sarah, for example, that God was able to do. Sarah, like, you're Jewish, your entire thing is based on someone that happened to, and you're saying this can't happen to your wife. Whereas virgin birth, regardless of what people say, but there were other virgin births in ancient cultures. I've yet to find an original source on that. If somebody has an original source on that, I would welcome that. I just know, people write these books and say, well, Christianity is a retelling of this and that and the other thing. And I've tried to find original sources. They don't even footnote it in the books that I have. And then I've tried, Chat GPT and all that other stuff. But anyway, if somebody else knows more than me about that, great. But I think in the story, from the context of the story, Zechariah and Elizabeth have a testimony from the scriptures. Something completely different and new is happening with Mary. But that's beside the point, because that's imposing a literal historical interpretation on this. And I'm not intending to do that. It's just hard to tell the story without those components in it. But here's what I want you to see. In Elizabeth, there's an expression of the divine feminine in the birth of John the Baptist. And in the birth of Jesus, or in Mary, in Elizabeth, there's an expression of the divine feminine. In Mary, there's an expression of the divine masculine. Or if you don't like those terms, there's a feminine aspect of the miracle in the conception of John the Baptist, and there's a masculine, miraculous aspect in the birth, or in the conception, not the birth. Births happen the way they happen. The conceptions are what's important, right? In the conception of John the Baptist, or in Elizabeth, you have the feminine. In the conception of Jesus, in Mary, you have the masculine. And the angel Gabriel brings them together and says, go spend time, basically, with your cousin Elizabeth. And the interesting thing is that Mary does not feel the baby move in her womb. So she hasn't had sex. She probably had an experience with the Holy Spirit. Spiritual sex is taboo in our culture, but it's not so, and definitely wasn't taboo in the ancient culture. So it is conceivable. See what I did there? It is conceivable that she had some kind of sexual, spiritual experience. And yet she doesn't feel the baby in her womb. Again, that's presupposing historicity, and I don't want to do that. But in the story, so she goes, and when she gets in the presence of Elizabeth, or the two babies, Jesus gets in the presence of John the Baptist. Mary says the baby leapt. That's when she lets out, this praise or whatever, and Elizabeth lets out this praise because the baby leapt in her womb, and okay, there's a savior, there's a Christ figure that is coming, right? Now remember, this is all about us. This is all about internal stuff inside of us. To echo what Lisa was saying, to reaffirm what Lisa was saying in that comment, yes, religion gets us looking outside ourselves, and so puts us in a state of perpetual self-betrayal and resentment. And this is what people are undoing. This is what people are unwinding as they're going through this process. And some of you are doing it for us openly, at least on Facebook, and I appreciate you for that. I'm not going to mention your names because I didn't ask for permission to do that, but I appreciate those of you that are sharing your journey so transparently, so openly with us, because what we're seeing is a healing, a reworking, a healing from having lived in this state of self-betrayal for all this time. But if we understand all this stuff is in us, all this stuff is components of us, then the self-betrayal can end and the self-exploration can really begin of these divine aspects, this golden shadow work, if you will. So I'm tying this all into golden shadow work. So what do Elizabeth, and what do the feminine, the masculine, what does all this have to do with all of this, Aaron? I want you to see that as part of this process, there is both active and receptive principles that are eternal or that are divine, that are working themselves out in us in this process. And Mary has to go somewhere away from the social agreements that say, this is not possible. This cannot happen. There was something conceived in her, though she knew not a man. There was the old, there's the masculine and the feminine in this story, aspects of ourselves, but there's also the old and the new aspect. There's that which is passing away. We find out later that John the Baptist is the last prophet of the old covenant. He's the greatest one ever born, Jesus said in Matthew's gospel, under the old covenant, right? He's the voice of one crying in the wilderness. He's preparing the way. So he's part of the old. Elizabeth is part of the old. John the Baptist is part of the old. They're the omega to it. They're the end to it. And it's passing away. But John the Baptist, so his ministry, you could say, is twofold. Not only is it the ending of an age, but he's the witness of the new age, and Jesus represents the new age. The old self witnessing to the new self, the old age witnessing to the new age, the transitional system, the old in Elizabeth, the new in Mary. And it wasn't until the two had come together, right? So she had to get away from the old agreements and enter into the new agreements. Elizabeth had to do the same thing, and they meet together. And then later, the Savior's born, right? The Savior's in you. In other words, the deliverance is going to come from yourself. What Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, if you bring forth that which is within you, that which you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, that which you do not bring forth will destroy you. So you're looking within yourself. Everything that you need is within yourself. It's self-contained. It just needs to be discovered and awakened and nurtured and incubated and birthed. And sometimes we need people that can agree with that. Sometimes we don't need the cynics and the naysayers around us in our lives when we're going through this process. We don't need people checking us or holding us accountable or telling us that we're wrong. I mean, there's so many forces that try to pull us back into the old consensus, but John the Baptist represents something from the old world that is in agreement, or that's harmonious, or that is the voice, or that is the vibration of that which is coming and that which is new. So we can take this, since we talked a little bit about astrology, we can take this on a macro scale and say that we're shifting, we're moving, have moved from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. The change has happened in the sky, but the change hasn't completely happened within us. It certainly hasn't completely happened within the collective. So the old systems are being shaken. The old systems are passing away. The old systems of the age of Pisces are dying. And there is a new age, the age of Aquarius, that is being born in the collective consciousness of humanity, because it's being impacted by the stars. It's being impacted by the universe. However that stuff works. I know it works. I don't know how it works, but however it works is impacting us collectively so that a new thing can manifest. But for a lot of us, on an individual or a microcosmic level, it may be happening inside of you, maybe happening in you as an individual. So many of us have awakened and deconstructed the dream of the old in unprecedented ways. This didn't happen in my parents' generation. This certainly didn't happen in my grandparents' generation. This seems to be, on a massive scale, only happening within our generation. This new thing that's happening, this dissolving of the dream of the age of Pisces, this dissolving of the dream of religion, what we call deconstruction. You're saying, I'm not going to dream that dream anymore. But yet at the same time, there is a new dream for many of us that is leaping on the inside of us, that our soul is losing the shackles and the chains, and we're awakening, and our wings, if you will, are unfurling, and we're wanting to soar. We're wanting that freedom, and that new thing is emerging. That new dream is dreaming. That new self is wanting to come forth, but that new self isn't just going to happen independently of you. That's the point of this whole thing. It's not going to happen without you. It's not going to happen without you. It's not going to happen independently of you. It's something that's taking place inside of you. It's a work and a process that's taking place inside of you, that is absolutely holy and absolutely divine. It is a Christmas season in you, in your consciousness, in your soul, giving birth to a new self, giving birth to a more free, more empowered self. And it sucks. It can suck because the old system is collapsing. The old system is falling away. And that can be very difficult for us. It can be very difficult for us to let go of the old so that we can have the new inside of us. but it's the direction that we're going. So I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you that you're carrying something inside of you that is so powerful. Don't give up. Don't stop. Don't stop asking questions. Don't get worn out with the process. Don't get tired, and heal and mend the aspects of yourself that have been wounded by that perpetual state of self-betrayal that we have been stuck in. All right, gang, I'm going to have to go. This came out totally differently than what I had thought, and maybe I'll come back later. I probably will, because this tends to happen to me. I'll come back and do something this week sometime, hopefully, just in the group where I follow up. So if you're not part of the New Day Global Facebook group and you want to join, that would be awesome. We'd love to welcome you into that community. Probably post the least of anybody that posts, and all the posts are just dynamic and powerful and practical, and I appreciate that. Lisa says, yes, the old is falling away and difficult. The new can also be very rocky and hard to embrace. Yes, both internally and collective. Stay curious and keep asking questions. C. Rodriguez says, old things passed away. All things have become new. So anyway, thanks everybody for watching this, listening to this. I'll try and do more content if you're interested along these lines, for sure, because there was more I wanted to get into between Elizabeth and Mary and how that pertains to a process that goes on inside of us. Just ran out of time. Love you guys. Bless you guys. Have a very Merry Christmas. If Christmas is a hard time for you, then may you find comfort in this season as well. And I will be with you later. Thanks, guys.